Well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. Very grateful to a whole bunch of people and the program that kind of took me in and it helped me to grow up, in a nutshell. The idea behind these podcasts is to go a little bit deeper into the spirituality, the history, the psychology of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, kind of taking a deeper dive into some things. And this week, I have a guest who's going to take us into some of the history that is really, really quite fascinating. He is the author of a brilliant book titled Writing the Big Book, The Creation of AA. Strongly encourage you to get a copy. In the show notes, there's a link there to Amazon. So I think anyone who's serious about the history of AA really needs to have this book in their library. So welcome, Bill. It's really, really good to have you. And congratulations on the book. It was an important contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, it's good to have you here. And I want to begin by asking you three questions. I'll go back and take each one at a time. But first three questions I wanted to start off with, what was it that drew you to writing the book? Secondly, what was it that you hoped to accomplish in writing it? And finally, did you have any idea it was going to turn out to be as big and massive a study as it turned out to be? So let's start with what drew you to the book.
I'm a longtime AA guy. I got sober in December 7th, 1981. And I've been sober and active in AA ever since. I'm, 4 meetings a week guy. So I'm active. Got a sponsor, got Nazis, all that stuff. But I'm a big Jim Burwell fan. Jim Burwell was the New York atheist. There was an auction in 2001 of a whole bunch of Jim Burwell's books, including his original manuscript, the multilith copy that was done in mid-February of 1939, a couple of months before the book actually came out. So we bought that. I bought that at auction. And I wanted to know how many copies had been offset printed, how many multilith copies had been made. And there's all kinds of different stuff going on. Bill Wilson always said 400. So I wanted to go down to the archive and see if I could find the invoice for the printing. I knew it was $165, but I didn't know how many copies they made. So I finally got permission to go down to the archive and started digging around. And I never found the invoice. I didn't find the invoice at Stepping Stones or GSO or Brown University or the Akron. I mean, just never found the invoice. So I have no idea how many copies of that are made. I'm a rare book dealer. So, if there was 400 copies, it has this degree of rarity. And if there's only 200 copies, it has that degree of rarity. So, But once I got down there, the people at GSO were just fabulous. Michelle Mirza, the current AA archives down there, she was just fabulous for me. I just kept asking for stuff and she kept showing me stuff. And I kept stumbling over things in the original documentation from 37, 38, 39 that contradicted the stories I've been hearing for decades in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Imagine that.
Yeah. It wasn't like this was a plan. Bill, I stumbled into it. Like most things in my life, I stumbled into it. People say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like I have any clue where I'm going to be 5 years from now. It just doesn't make any sense. And this was one of those things. No intention of doing the kind of research I ended up doing. Now, GSO doesn't let you copy documents. So that meant eventually that I was trying to record and then type it when I got home. But it meant that I had to go down to GSO and type every word on every piece of paper from 1935, 36, 37, 38, and half of 39. It's like a 400-page document. Fortunately, I only live about an hour plus from New York City, so I could go down there and do that sort of thing. It was easily accessible to me. And again, the people at the archive in New York City at the General Service Office are just fabulous.
Good. So you started digging in and you found stuff of major interest to you, eh?
Well, yeah. I mean, there was all kinds of things in there that were just fascinating things. When the book's been out for over 5 years, when the book first came out, I did a bunch of radio interviews. And one of the questions always came up was, what was the most interesting thing you found when you were doing all this research? And there was a ton of things. I made up a list at one point. I think there was 38 things on the list, but really, really fascinating things I found that I didn't know. And that quite frankly, nobody else knew because nobody had done this kind of research before, or if they did it, they never wrote it up any place that I could access it and get to it. But the big three reveals that came up over and over and over again throughout this research of this, what Bill Wilson called the flying blind period before from 34 when he got sober in December until April of 1939. The three big things were that Bill Wilson was not a reliable historian. I mean, he told those stories over and over again, and he wasn't a reliable historian. The second thing was that there was this guy named Hank Parkhurst, who was his first convert to alcoholics and to sobriety in New York City when he got back from Akron after Dr. Bob gets sober. And Parkhurst and Wilson are joined at the hip here. And the more and more I looked at the documentation, the letters they were sending back to each other and things, the more I realized this guy, after Bill Wilson, was the most important guy in relation to the writing of the big book. One of the things I'm fond of saying because, people just don't seem to get it. It's like, I never heard of the guy. So
no, Parkhurst got lost. He got buried. Yeah, if you get drunk, you get buried.
Yeah, well, that was the problem, was he drank about 6 or 8 months after the book came out. So, But at the time, I'm fond of saying, no Hank, no big book. Read my book. I mean, comes up all the time. He's jump-starting the project. He's lighting a fire under Bill Wilson's butt so he could get going again. And he was always critiquing what was going into the book and telling Wilson he was putting the wrong stuff in the book. So they were always arguing about this.
We're going to get into him in some depth, I hope, in this interview. But just by way of introduction, so once you decided to write it, what was it that you hoped to accomplish? You wrote a book on Nietzsche, did you not? Did you?
Yes, I wrote a book on the German philosopher Nietzsche. It was published by the University of Chicago Press. Whoa, big deal for a guy who's running a family blueprint shop in Norwalk, Connecticut. And amazingly, the Germans were so impressed with it. They're very snooty about people writing about Nietzsche in English that they translated it into German and published it in German several years later. So I don't have the academic training for this stuff, but I've been doing this all along. I didn't really have a plan for what I wanted to be doing here. I was just fascinated with this thing. And I've got a discipline of writing, and I have my wife is really, really great about cutting time out so that I can do these things. And I was just fascinated with the stories, and it's like it's not like I wanted to rub people's nose and say, those stories you heard all those years are really BS. And let me tell you what the real story is. Yeah. That wasn't what was going on here at all. But there was stuff going on there that I had never heard anywhere. And
well, let's jump into that. So your book has it's massive. It's 800 some odd pages, and 31 chapters. And we only have time to really maybe focus primarily on that first chapter that you wrote. And it's titled Challenging the Creation Myths. And it's focused on the years before the big book was written and that period that Wilson called the flying blind period, as you described it. So let's start with Wilson. How would you rate him as an honest historian?
Bill was a terrible historian. Bill wasn't a historian. He was a storyteller. He was a salesman. It just
promoter.
To hold Bill Wilson up and say, this is really. I had a guy come into my office one time that he'd doing similar kind of research down in the archive, and he was trying to tell me Wilson was a liar because the stories he told didn't match the facts that we absolutely concretely knew about black and white pieces of paper from 1938, for instance.
Right.
And it's like, dude, you're missing the point here. That's not what he was doing. Bill Wilson was trying to get people sober. He wasn't trying to tell an accurate history of early Alcoholics Anonymous. He could give a rip about that. I mean, he did start worrying about it when he wrote AA Comes of Age. He tried to do a good job on that, but I've got all kinds of problems with what he did in that book also. Yeah, Wilson was a terrible historian. My friend Jim Morley does a wonderful presentation about his story, which is Bill Wilson, and History, which is my book. So he compares what Wilson said with what I found out in the book, and that's a fun presentation. I think I like that presentation.
Yeah, you're right. This is a quote from the book. Wilson wasn't just a storyteller. He was at times a conscious and deliberate myth maker. Can we talk for a moment about myths, what they are, why they're important, and how they're distinguished or differentiated from historical fact?
Myths embody a large truth. This is what I think of. The myths embody a larger truth, and they package it in sound bites. Let's say, they
Right.
packaged in a way that you could do the deal. You could understand what was going on there.
Right.
This isn't just AA history. I mean,
No.
I mean,
every culture has its myths, and they're extremely important. They're embedded in the psyche. So I was looking up this morning on Nietzsche, was he involved with myths? And yes, he was, because Jung was a great believer in the importance of myths. So
that's a principle of his psychology.
Yeah. And in my own Christian background, it was like, well, I don't think I believe this, and I don't think I believe that. And it wasn't until I really started to understand the myth that I really began to understand the deeper truths that were being expressed, but they're not historically accurate, many of them. So quite similar.
No, and again, this isn't just Bill Wilson. This isn't just Alcoholics Anonymous history. I mean,
right.
Let's just look at the founding fathers, our revered founding fathers. Does anybody mention how many slaves George Washington had throughout his entire life?
We're not going to talk about that.
That's a messy detail.
It's a messy detail. Let's get rid of it.
But we can't do that. The same thing, so Jefferson's in the same class, not only to mention that, but Sally Hemings, his wife's maid that he was having children with, supposedly. We can't be going there because Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and blah, 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 so
put him on a pedestal.
That's the story we tell. That's the story we tell.
And we've put Wilson on a pedestal and Dr. Bob on a pedestal. All of these guys are you don't touch anything that's going to be negative. And I don't think your book is negative. It's not negative at all. Throughout, I can see a deep respect for the importance of these people, the importance of the book that they wrote. I mean, I think you love the book, but people need to understand it if they want to. But if you've got AA fundamentalists, it's like AA Christians who it's like, hey, we don't go there.
I got to tell you, I mean, so like what you asked me earlier, what I wanted to accomplish with this book.
Right.
One of the things I didn't set out to do, but one of the things I have accomplished, I think, is that Bill Wilson told all these stories about early AA history, and they're just miraculous stories. There's just all this miraculous stuff going on, and it's just wonderful, and it's beautiful, and it's blah, blah. I got to tell you, I think the stories in my book are far more miraculous in how we got from Bill Wilson getting sober in December of 34 to printing a book in April of 1939. It documents how often we could have gone off the rails, and for some reason, you can have your explanation, and I could have my explanation, but for some reason, the thing got back. I mean, I'm going through Lois's diaries at one point. So Wilson writes the first two chapters of the book in May and June of 1938. 2 weeks after he writes there is a solution, she says, Bill and I got in an argument, and he says, screw you, I'm going out and I'm going to drink. I'm going to go get drunk. I'm going to the bar.
Did he really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, and instead of doing that, he goes over to Hank Parkhurst's house, and Parkhurst talks him off. The thirstiest man in New York City in mid-June of 1938 is Bill Wilson. Now, if you don't think that would have taken us off the track completely, if Bill had gone out and gotten drunk in June of 1930, Bill, you and I wouldn't be here talking.
That's right.
You and I neither of us would be alive, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Well, let's start with the Oxford group and with Wilson's association with it and Dr. Bob's association with him. I mean, they were different, but that got buried too, didn't it, in the writing of the book? They didn't want to associate the new fellowship with the Oxford group.
No, they didn't. And certainly it got buried. I mean, not only was Wilson a myth maker, but he also avoided, embarrassing details. We talked about Hank Parkhurst, right? Right-hand man, most important guy after Bill Wilson writing the book, drank 6 months later. He gets written out of the story. That's an embarrassing, it's embarrassing. can't say this guy was so critical to the production of this book, and then he drank himself. I mean, it's bad selling. Same thing with the Oxford group. The Oxford group had picked up, most especially in the late 30s, picked up a bunch of negative publicity, and not only that, it was a simple program, a first century Christian program.
Yeah.
What was so they're not going to arguments about transubstantiation or the Trinity or blah, 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 all of that stuff. But it was, in fact, a 100% Christian organization. 100%. And Wilson was trying to disassociate from that. He wrote a wonderful letter in 1940 where somebody asked him, a guy down in Virginia said, how come you guys left the Oxford group? And he lists like 8 things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've seen that.
This didn't work for us. And they had the 4 absolutes, and you can't tell alcoholics they got to do it. You can't do it. That was not working, So they stopped doing that. Wilson moved away from the Oxford group. He was deep in the Oxford group. He was going to house meetings. He was doing witnessing.
Yeah, the first 2 years of his sobriety, he was quite active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what people say, people think that Bill Wilson got this whole idea of God as we understand him, this great umbrella thing of the higher power when he was in the hospital in 1934.
Mm-hmm.
But he comes out and he gets into the Oxford group, and he writes a letter in a couple of months after he's out of the hospital to a guy who he had been in hospital with before, Roger. And he says that he's on the holy, you will probably be surprised that I am on the holy roller coaster, One of my Zoom presentations is about going from just religion to spiritual kind of thing.
Yes.
And I kind of track, especially those early days. And people just don't want to, they don't want to say out loud that these people were staying sober on Jesus. That's what they were doing. They were staying sober on Jesus.
Right.
But we can't say that, because,
right.
Oh, no. What were they doing to stay sober before the 12 steps? Well, I'll tell you, most of the people in New York are staying sober on Jesus, and all of the people out in Akron are staying sober on Jesus before the 12 steps were published. So.
Right. I got introduced to the Oxford group influence on AA 30 some odd years ago, and it really changed my understanding of the program. Of the AA program, of the steps. What Wilson said, steps 2 through 11, we got directly out of the Oxford group. That opened some doors for me to understand the steps very differently. And I was really grateful. An AA archivist in Oklahoma City, he's the one who introduced me to it and changed my life.
Right.
It was amazing.
Well, they certainly had a huge impact on, it was the soil out of which Alcoholics Anonymous grew. There's just no doubt about that. Doesn't get mentioned a lot in the literature that Bill was talking about because of all he was in fact trying to distance him from that.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff they did, their packaging was such, but the stuff they were doing was just basic spiritual principles been around for millennia. We need to be honest. We need to be pure. We need to be unselfish. We need to be loving. Did you invent that, guys? No, we didn't invent that, guy. We just packaged it this way and said, these are the absolutes, things that you should be doing. And they have 4 spiritual practices. They're going to do sharing, and they're going to do restitution, and they're going to surrender their lives to God, and they're going to listen to God for guidance.
Right.
Did they invent those things? No. But was that the packaging in which Wilson was introduced to those particular ideas with a vengeance, as opposed, he's not drinking anymore. So now he's looking for something. And
Frank Bookman, the founder of the Oxford group, he was very practical, maybe in a similar sense to Wilson. If it worked, he wanted to use it. If it was effective, let's put it to use. If it's not, throw it out.
William James.
William
James walks on water, as far as I'm concerned. He's just, but it's an American thing, If it works, hey, we're all for it if it works.
A little aside here, but Wilson says, okay, I got 2 through 11 from the Oxford group. That leaves open 1 and 12. Does William James, in your view, fit into those?
Well, I think James fits into those in the sense that Wilson's own experience was what that's what he was all about, was his own experience. But
he also read varieties of religious experience in the hospital, supposedly.
About that, but okay.
Is that a doubtful one too?
Oh yeah, totally. So, I mean, Bill Wilson, I've got quotes. He literally says, I'm laying in Towns Hospital.
Yeah.
And Ebie shows up and gives me varieties of it. And I burned through it. I just read the whole thing. It was really, hold it. You're 2 days off of booze. You're 1 day off of belladonna. And you just read William J's. I said, I always say to people who tell me that story, I said, have you tried to read Varieties of Religious Experience? Have you tried that?
Yeah.
Now, the story is the closer to the truth story, to my understanding. This is speculation.
That's okay. Yeah, good.
It fits in. One of the things that the Oxford group was big on was conversion. They had this conversion. It was one of their 5 C's was conversion.
Sure.
And there's a chapter in Varieties called Conversion. So I suspect that Ebie gave him the book and, bookmarked the conversion chapter. And he said to Bill, look, if you can't get through these 32 pages, they aren't an easy 32 pages for somebody who just came out, somebody who's in detox, for God's sakes. So there's a story in here about a guy named Hadley who was a drunk who had a spiritual experience just like yours. So I don't want you dismissing that spiritual experience, friend, because it's real. And it happened not just to you, but to other people. So if all else fails, read this 2.5-page reference to Hadley in Varieties of Religious Experience. And Hadley, of course, is all talking about Jesus came to the white light experience, blah, blah, blah. Now, Ebie coming in and saying, Bill, try the chapter. If you can't do the chapter, read these 2.5 pages. I believe that happened. I believe that's what Wilson read. And I think it had an impact on him. But to say that he read through the whole Varieties at any time in his life, Ernie Kurtz, who was my mentor until he died, he was like, Bill was not a reader. Bill was a person who picked up things by osmosis from, other people who read books and told them what they had read, and now I have friends that I argue with this about. My opinion isn't cast in stone or absolutely 100% true, but it's my opinion. And this whole thing about the Varieties, it just makes me crazy when people say that, well, he did that. And what they're trying to tell me is he came out of the hospital with God as we understand him, this huge concept of anything goes, Cole, just anything goes. As long as you're in the divinity zone, it's a good deal, And when you read the documents from 35 and 36 and 30, that is not what's going on. It is not what's going on in Alcoholics Anonymous. Clarence, the great
Clarence Snyder. Clarence Snyder.
Gets over in February of 1938.
Right.
So we're talking about 14 months before the book is published. February 1938. And Clarence tells the story. He's in the hospital. He's been in the hospital for several days. Guys been coming and talking to him, telling him their stories, but not telling him what the secret is. So Dr. Bob comes in. He's the closer. Dr. Bob's the closer, meets Clarence at his last day in the hospital. And Clarence is saying, I want to know what's going on. And Dr. Bob says, you got to pray. We're going to get down on your knees and pray. And Clarence says, I don't know how to pray. Dr. Bob says, that's okay. I'll show you how to do that. Come on. So the two of them get down on their knees in Clarence's his hospital room. According to Clarence, Dr. Bob says something like this. I don't have it word for word. He says, Jesus, this is Clarence. I want to introduce you to Clarence. He's got a real problem with alcohol. Clarence, this is Jesus. This is how you're going to get over your alcoholism, and that's what's going to happen. Come on, it's just to say that Wilson walks out of Towns Hospital in December 1934 with this great vision of openness about religiosity and spirituality. Right. It's just complete. It's not even close.
But it did evolve more and more in that direction.
It most certainly did. As I said, I got this whole PowerPoint present, this whole our YouTube thing on that evolution. There's an evolution. And one of the reasons we evolved as far as we did by April of 1939, there was much more evolution to come. But that evolution was driven primarily by Dr. Silkworth, whose moral psychology was psychological and had to do with self-centeredness, and Hank Parkhurst, who was 100% on, that was the solution.
Parkhurst wanted to get away from the religious angle.
Yeah.
Very much so. Not so much Silkworth, though, I don't think, huh? Silkworth was, I've read, and this maybe was speculation, I'm not sure, but that he had some association with Calvary Church and Shoemaker and that bunch.
Don't know.
Didn't come across that.
I've never seen that. Now, of course, he ends the doctor's opinion. Those who came to scoff stayed to pray. So,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Silkworth was anti-religious. I mean, he published articles about his experiences with alcoholics and his proposed solution for curing alcoholism. And in 1937, he publishes a 4-page article.
Yeah.
And the last part of that article, the fourth one, is moral psychology.
Right.
And what he basically says is, these people have to get their heads out of their butts because all they're doing is paying attention to themselves. They are so self-centered. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we thought was the root of our problem. Where did that come? That's come right out of Silkworth. So, when they start paying attention to other people and trying to be of maximum service and useful to others, all of a sudden there's this psychological shift from being self-centered to morally engaging with other people in the world. And that's what Silkworth said the solution was.
Many modern psychologists agree with that today.
Well, it's the whole, is it the fellowship or the program? Personally, I think it's both of those things. But I mean, I stayed sober on fellowship for almost 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's dive into Ebie Thatcher. We're talking about myths and how they get created. And there's a big, very strong myth, I guess, about Ebie Thatcher and his famous visit to Bill Wilson, the kitchen, the pineapple, and the gin. And Ebie comes and knocks on the door. I've got religion. So tell us what the original myth is, and then what you found out the truth was.
There's a blend going on here, but certainly Bill Wilson's version of the story, which he wrote and is published in the big book, In Bill's Story, is that Ebie comes over and Bill thinks we're going to drink together, and he's drinking gin and pineapple juice. It sounds like a horrible thing, and Ebie refuses it. I would have refused it, even my best of day drinking, I suspect. And he says he's got religion. Wilson says, "Oh man, you really got something going here. I'm amazed at it, and isn't it wonderful?" Wilson keeps drinking, of course, but he starts showing up at Calvary Mission.
Right.
He's going down there drunk and testifying and things like that. But finally, he does get sober several weeks later. So anyhow, that's his story. Ebie told this story over and over again. There's a number of recordings of him doing this. And one of those recordings is of a speech he gave with Bill Wilson in the audience, on the
Wilson was in the audience. I didn't know that.
Right,
okay.
Behind him, right?
Yeah. And
he does this whole thing, and he says, I'm going to tell you the story. He said, but it's not, I know it's not what you read in the book. He said, I called up, and I got Lois on the phone. Bill didn't answer the phone. Supposedly, Bill answered the phone and talked to him. So I had Lois on the phone, and Lois and I made a date for me to come over for dinner some other time. That comes up. He goes over. He gets there. Nobody's home except Mr. Green, who is an old family retainer who lives in the basement. And Bill's out and Lois is out. So Ebie just stays and waits. And he comes. Finally, everybody shows up. They have dinner downstairs with Bill, Ebie, Lois, and the woman they rented the top floor of that brownstone in Brooklyn too, because they needed the money. She gets invited to dinner. The four of them have dinner. After dinner, they go upstairs to the parlor, which is on the second floor in the brownstone. And Lois says to Ebie, according to Ebie, "So Ebie, why don't you tell us what's going on with you?" And Ebie starts telling the story about getting sober and getting religion and the Oxford group and all the stuff that happened in Vermont, blah, blah. And Wilson, according to Ebie, was very impressed with the story, walked him back to the subway and said, "I don't know what you got, kid, but it really sounds like a great deal." Now, when Ebie told that story, one of the times he told that story, it was great. He said, "Now, I know this isn't the story that you know in the big book." He said, "But you got to remember, that night in Brooklyn, one of us was sober and one of us was drunk. Whose version are you going to believe, There's all this wonderful color to this story that he tells. It's really detailed and layered. So I was just gobsmacked by that. It was like, what the hell is going on here? Because I'm reading Ebie's story and there's just a credibility to it that I just couldn't drive by, And he's not like he's going to make up some cockamamie story and tell it with Bill Wilson sitting behind him on the dais. It's just, give me a break. I've got to give serious credibility to this story. Now, but to do that, I have to explain to myself at least, how come Bill Wilson told this completely different story? Right. What was going on there, And I think it took me a while to realize it, but this is when I kind of really stumbled into this myth-making thing. This parable. The man told parables. He was just trying to get people sober. And I realized that Ebie's version is messy beyond belief. It's just messy beyond belief. It's got all these other people in it. It's got all these other. It's just crazy. Bill's story is clean and it's to the point. And so I thought, yeah, well, it's to the point. What's the point? The point of that story is that the message of recovery is best carried by one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. No Lois.
So we get rid of all those people.
No Mr. Green. No girl upstairs. No, we just let's boil this down into a soundbite that when I tell this story, people will understand what I'm trying to tell them.
So let me read the quote from your book. Wilson's story had drama and impact, delivering an unmistakable message of hope. Thatcher's did not. That's it.
It was too confusing. I mean, you get lost in the story. By the time you finish dinner, you think, why am I listening to this? That what's going on here? Bill Wilson pushing a drink across the table to Ebie and saying, here you go, Eb. And Ebie saying, no, I'm not drinking. And he says, why? And he says, because I got religion. I mean, Bill, I don't want to give up that story. I'm not going to, if I'm working with a newcomer, I'm going to stick with the big book story.
Right.
I'm good with telling the myth. I'm good with telling the cleaned up, less messy story because whatever this guy I'm talking to, I want him to get the point that what we're doing here, you and I sitting here talking to each other. Wilson said, that's the whole point. This is one of the foundational principles of Alcoholics Anonymous is you don't go see your shrink or your doctor. You're one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic.
Yeah. No, that's such an important point for people to understand your book. Myths have their place. And if you can boil them down to the essence, and that's what I think you're doing in that statement. The essence is what's important, not the historical facts so much. Would you say Wilson kind of, for him, the ends justify the means?
I don't know. That's a little Jesuitical, I think.
I was in the Jesuits for 2 years, so you got to forgive me for that one.
I went to a Jesuit university, so. But I think it's like the wrong question to say that the ends justified the means. You're getting in a whole argument about things that don't really apply here. This is not a black or white sort of thing. It's not like, again, but we don't want to impugn Bill Wilson's. I'm impugning his credibility on details.
Right.
I'm not impugning his credibility on the effectiveness of the stories he told. I'm not doing that at all,
Right. I hear you.
He did it over and over and over again. I mean, there's the famous story of the counting noses out in Akron, Ohio in October 1937. Bill tells it. He goes out there and he sits down with Bob and Ann and they pray and then they make a list and they say 40 guys. Oh my God, we got 40 guys. And we should have hospitals and missionaries and we should write a book. Let's have a meeting. And they vote and they just barely pass. You go into the documents, Bill Rodell, who got sober several months before over in New Jersey, picks up Bill and Lois and they drive up to Pennsylvania and spend the night. Then they pick up Ebie on the train and they go up there. So he's bringing all these people up there with him, Wilson. It's not just Bill and Bob and Ann up there. Lois is there. And these New York guys are there. He's got some pocket votes. He's got some votes in his back pocket and he's bringing them up there because he wants to get this deal going. And Lois's diary has all these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful details about the day before, the day that they start driving up and the trip and then the trip home. In the middle, she's torn 5 pages out of her diary.
Yeah.
That's one of the great mysteries of the story that I tell over this 18-month period. It's like, what the devil was in those 5 pages of great details about what happened during that meeting. But again, Wilson's story, just boils down to the fact that, my God, the point is they believed they had a cure. They believed, and they used that word cure. They used that word cure during the 30s for sure, and even into the early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So Wilson's, again, he's getting rid of messy details. And talking about, so it was like a group conscience out there. We took a vote. It was very democratic. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous runs it.
Is the 100 men count a myth as well? Are there not 100?
I don't know. I don't know what the body count was at the time. Bill was low.
100 is a nice number, isn't it?
It's a great number. But you know what's really funny is they were using the 100 number in August of 1938, and they used it in all these documents. I mean, all kinds of letters. They're talking about, we got 100 guys sober. August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. We got 100 guys sober. It was like, what the hell? What's going on here? You didn't get anybody sober, anybody new sober between August and April.
It was a bad season, Bill.
And Ruth Hawk was always saying Bill had this. She said he had a tendency to round things up. He was rounding things up. So I got that. My friend John Barton's done some really wonderful research on who was the head count? Who were the 100 guys?
Right.
And one woman. But anyhow, it's a good number. I said Bill Wilson was not a great historian. Hank Parkhurst was so important to this deal that nobody talks about. The third thing that I learned was that, Bill Wilson wrote this book. And it wasn't 100 guys who wrote this book.
Right.
The people in Akron had zero. I mean, Wilson writes Bob a letter and says in November of 1938, and he said, Bob's got like 6 chapters already or 7 chapters already. And he says to Bob, he said, I'm glad you like the chapters, Bob. Could you please give me some feedback? These people in New York, they're afraid of hurting my feelings. I can't get any much feedback down here, but you're giving me nothing. And he later said in 2 things that he said later, he said, he sent these chapters out to Akron, but Bob didn't show them around much. That's a quote. Bob didn't show them around much. And what he got back from Akron was the warmest support. Now, if that isn't damnation with faint praise, I don't know what the hell it is. All he got back from them was the warmest support. So there wasn't any blood on the floor. Bob wasn't even showing them to all the guys out there because there were some people that were opposed to the project.
Right. It was Wilson's book.
Wilson wrote that book.
He wrote the book.
I know he took into consideration a whole bunch of stuff, especially stuff that was going on in New York at that time.
Yeah.
But Bill Wilson wrote that book. Yes.
Yeah. Date of Dr. Bob's last drink. A lot of historians have disputed that one, huh?
Bob's last drink was, if the timeline in the story is correct, was not June 10th. It was June 17th.
Right.
Or certainly the convention happened after June 10th. Okay, that he was supposedly attending in Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, yes.
So either the date isn't the 10th, it's the 17th, or Bob was just moving his I'm going to Atlantic City to go to that convention, honey, and it's this date, not that date, because I'm really planning on going down there and drinking. I mean, he started drinking on the train before he even left. So doesn't make any difference. It's just
doesn't make any difference. No, and we're not going to change it.
No, who cares? Who
cares?
But
I don't want him to change it because it's June 10th is my wife's birthday. So I remember those 2. We ain't changing it. AA number 3 probably wasn't number 3 that they worked with, hey?
No, there was at least a couple of guys that they worked with. Again, this story comes out. I mean, certainly it's mentioned in A Vision for You, but it comes out real strongly in the second forward. Bill wrote the second forward to the second edition, and there's all that stuff. And he says, yeah, Bob and I got sober. Bob finally got sober, and we immediately decided we needed to go work with another alcoholic.
Right.
We're talking about that's Bill Wilson walking the floor in the hotel in Akron, Ohio, and again, he was the thirstiest guy in Ohio at this point. And he decides what kept me sober was talking to another drunk. So I got to go talk to a drunk. And that works with Bob. So then the 2 of them think, okay, we got to do that. And they do. They try and get a couple of people sober that don't get sober. But Wilson says, again, that's a messy detail. That's a messy detail. So in the forward, he says, Bob and I knew we had to go talk to another alcoholic. So we went to the hospital, and the first guy we talked to got sober and stayed sober. And, so
it's a miracle.
It's a miracle. And what's the point? Now, it reinforces this whole thing about working with others, but it also underlines the fact that this thing is portable, that it didn't just work for me, and it didn't just work for this other guy. It worked for a third guy. Holy Moses, how many people is this going to work for everybody? Certainly looking like that. And by the way, that guy never drank again. So it wasn't just wasn't just effective and portable, but it was successful in a continuous way.
Mm-hmm. What about the 75% recovery rate, the 90% in Cleveland? Those statistics get batted around. Did you come across anything relating to that? Or
there's all the letters from the 38, for instance, and into 39 talk about basically this 50% get sober, 25% don't, but they come back.
And they come back.
They get sober, and then the other 25%. And those numbers or numbers close to that are used repeatedly in the 1938, 1939 letters. Wilson didn't write that until he got to the second edition, and he put it. I think that's where it is. But anyhow, I don't know. When I get into arguments with people, here's the deal. What does it say? It says 50% of the people who really tried. That's what it said. That's a quote. Really tried. So what's this really tried thing? Does that mean that the judge sent you to AA and you went to 4 meetings and you said it doesn't work and you never came back? And did you really try? That's, in my world, really trying means you're trying to make 90 meetings in 90 days. You get yourself a sponsor, you talk to them regularly, and you start working the steps. And if you do that stuff, there's a 50% chance you're going to stay sober.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. I'm
totally good
with that. I think people who denigrate this just first as if we actually had statistical evidence for success rates in Alcoholics Anonymous that were accurate, which we don't because we're an anonymous program. But really, 50% of those who quote really tried, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early days, that meant you weren't allowed to go to a meeting in Akron, Ohio until you got on your knees and surrendered to God. And in those days, they were really surrendering to Jesus. Mm-hmm. You couldn't go to a meeting. So if you were in the hospital and you surrendered in the hospital, you could go to the meeting. If you got out of the hospital, you hadn't surrendered yet, they wouldn't let you in the meeting at T. Henry Williams' house. You had to go upstairs and you get on your knees with a couple of guys and surrender up there. And then you could come to a meeting. Now, a guy who's gone through that sort of process, at that point, he's really trying. He's thrown himself on the grenade, and
they're not doing that kind of surrender in Connecticut these days.
No, they're not. No. I'd be a dead man if they were doing that.
Well, once I learned about it, and I was doing chaplaincy work for a long while. I did a lot of fifth steps, and I talked to the guys. Have you done a third step? With somebody, kind of going back to the old way. And most of them would say, of course, no, never did. And then I'd kind of tell them the history and do you want to do it? One guy, I'll never forget him, a Hispanic guy, one of the best third step surrenders I'd ever heard. Tough street guy, gets down on his knees. And I say, you willing to do it on your knees? I get down there with him. And he says, Jesus, I've really fucked up my life. Please help me. That's beautiful. A beautiful third step, You're in, buddy.
We really need to have I think you're talking about success and not success. It seems to me the people that really have completely realized that they need a whole new set of something because everything else just went away. I can remember when I first got sober, just this tabula rasa thing. I didn't know what the hell I thought. I didn't know what I felt. But I knew I didn't want to drink and I knew I was going to do this AA thing, but I went out to buy a shirt one time, a button down shirt. And I went into the department store locally and I couldn't figure out if I liked the color blue. And I was like, you are so brain dead here. I mean, I was washed. I was really blank. Called my sponsor. I freaked out. I went over his house and I told him how, I don't know who I am. I don't know if I like the color blue and I'm so screwed up over here. And he was like, well, what you are is an alcoholic, he said. And we don't really, someday I may be interested in what you feel and how what you think. But at the moment, all I care about is what you do. And I want you to be going to meetings every single day and doing this, doing that, doing the other thing.
Yeah.
But people who come in and say, man, I am so completely lost. I don't have a clue anymore. I'm thinking those people have a better chance of success than people who cling on to so much of the old stuff.
Right. The meetings really replaced the prayer and meditation part, huh? Frank Amos's report,
Yeah, you can't drive by it. I didn't start meditating in AA until I was 26, 27 years sober. And I really did that because my friend Jay Stenick's wife, they're big meditators.
I've met them. Yeah, I know them.
I was going out to California all the time and spending time with them. And they were always trying to get me to this Thursday meditation meeting in Manhattan Beach. I was never there on Thursday. Thank God. I didn't want to I don't need nothing new. I don't need any of this crazy woo California stuff. But Jay's wife, Adele, got my face. She was there kind of talking to me about meditation.
Yeah.
I was poo-pooing it. And she got in my face. She started poking me in the chest. And she said, "You can't get sober, sane, and healthy on 11 and a half steps." Damn, that got my attention. I didn't start meditating yet, but it got my attention.
Adele can do that.
Yeah. No doubt about it.
No doubt. We've got just a couple more, getting a little low on time here. Roland Hazard, his treatment with Jung. Did you get into any of that
No,
controversy? You didn't. Okay.
No, but there's a woman named Cora Finch she's got a wonderful thing online. It's like, I don't know, 70, 80 pages long, where she's done the research, and she's primary document research at Yale's archives and Harvard's archives, where all these Brown's archives, where these people were and whose papers have been saved. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of that paper, but it's Cora Finch and it's online. There's no doubt about it. It's all over the place.
I'll see if I can find it. If I can, I'll put it in the show notes. So I did want to devote a little bit more time to Hank Parkhurst, the driving force behind getting the big book. Anything else you want to add on that? What his contribution was? Just that relationship with Wilson, and was anything going on there with the secretary in the office?
Well, Hank had the hots for Ruth Hawk, and
yes.
He was married at the time, and his wife did. Hank's wife did throw him out of the house in the beginning of January. They had a New Year's Eve party there on New Year's Eve, and I suspect this is speculation.
That's okay.
I think Hank got caught in the laundry room with Ruth, and Kathleen threw him out. So for 10 weeks with the Wilsons, well, which is too bad for the historians, because now these two guys are sitting down breakfast, lunch, and dinner talking rather than putting any written notes back and forth. Just absolutely terrible. But yeah, Parkhurst was, he convinced Wilson to do the first two chapters because he thought that if they had the first two chapters of the book, they could use it as a selling tool to get interviews for people to give millions of dollars for hospitals and paid missionaries. That was the deal. And that was in May, June of 1938. Wilson doesn't write anything for 3 more months. I mean, he wasn't looking to write a book. He was just looking to get them some money. This was their door opener, that kind of thing. Getting past the gatekeeper to the guy who's actually got the money. So no money. Parkhurst in September of 1938 comes up with this deal. He's going to get an article written in a Sunday supplement called This Week, 6 million copies in Sunday newspapers all around the country. And in that thing, they're going to say, we got this fun and fabulous cure. Oh, and by the way, we're writing a book. And if you'd like a couple of chapters of the book, just send us $1. So now the article never happened, but this was the big plan. And it went on and on and on and on. But he goes to Bill Wilson and he says, listen, we're going to have this article and they're going to send us $1. I mean, you can't just send them 2 chapters, Bill. I mean, that's just lame, I mean, I need 5 chapters. So Bill Wilson starts writing again on September 15th. September 15th, he starts writing. He's got 2 chapters. All the rest of the book gets written and is ready to go to the editor on December 31st. How about that? September, October, November, December, 3.5 months later, we're done. A miracle. It's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle that we got because Hank Parkhurst kicked him in the butt and said, you got to go back and write this damn thing,
That's
so
it.
to get money.
That's it.
It's like, in almost everything in life, if you've got a question or an issue or a problem, you say, follow the money. That's the first place you want to start is follow the money. And certainly that's very helpful with early AA history is follow the money.
Right. Oh, all the time. In wrapping up, what do you hope people will take away from your book? We kind of approached this earlier in the interview, but I came away, like you said, understanding the reality doesn't shake me up at all. It enhances the credibility of what was going on there, not in historical facts, but again, like in the myth, because the myth can get repeated, the historical facts perhaps not. But a true myth is realizing maybe the simplicity, the beauty, the power of what is happening here. There was a woman, I did a podcast with a woman in Australia. She was third generation Oxford group, okay? Mother was in it, father was in it, grandfather, all that stuff. And she wrote a little pamphlet. And in it, she's kind of describing the Oxford group, what the process was about. And she boiled it down to 3 words. And in those 3 words, I saw the 12 steps. Her words were connection, 1, 2, 3, correction, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then direction. It was an insight. She didn't know about the 12 steps. I had an opportunity to go over to Switzerland a couple of times to meet with the remnants of the Oxford group. And the second visit, I had a chance to kind of present the 12 steps to them. Oh, very interesting. Oh, yes. They could see it, but the 2 groups have gone very, very far from one another.
But you asked about the takeaway,
Yeah.
I didn't plan this kind of a takeaway. I didn't plan this, but
right.
What I've seen over the 5 years the book has been out,
yeah.
First of all, the people who get most excited about it are people with more than 20 years of sobriety. It's just, it's amazing. It just,
right.
I have people come to me with regularity and tell me that I just reignited their program in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that was I had no idea that was happening, but I hear that over and over again.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that my book accomplishes, I didn't plan this. I think one of the things my book accomplishes is all of those old stories are just so deeply embedded in the religious culture of the late 1930s.
Right.
And they are deeply religious. They are over and over and over again deeply religious. My book tells a secular story, if you will. It's about the human beings and the fallible human beings and how this thing just came about despite all of that, And I think, it's 2025. The culture is so radically different today from what it was 80 plus years ago. Right. I mean, it's Danny, I don't even know how to talk about it. It's so different. And I think the story told in my book resonates with people in 2025 more than a lot of the old stories being told, which seem so dated and outdated to them, but there's nothing dated or outdated about my book. These are real people doing real things and screwing up in real ways. And, Ebie keeps drinking and getting sober and coming back. And then he drinks again, takes 2 other guys out with him from the house. And,
there's an expression that I hear some seminarians, they say, I went to the seminary, Yale or Harvard or wherever it might be, let's take a good one, and I lost my faith. And my thing is, well, you needed to lose that faith, because it wasn't grounded, in reality. And that's the power of myth and fables and parables and storytelling that there is within that the power to transform. Don't latch on to did this happen or did this not happen? What can it happen now is the question. Can it happen now? That's the question.
Yep. How real is it?
How real is it in your life?
I discovered a spiritual life in Alcoholics Anonymous I could never have dreamed of. I spent 2 years in a Roman Catholic seminary out of high school and lost my faith.
Yeah.
So, but I come into AA and it's like I said, I stayed sober on fellowship the first 20 years. And I've never encountered anything like the fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous anywhere else. And my civilian friends envy me for it. We have an open house. People are coming through here all the time doing stuff, And since I was 21 years sober. I've been doing other stuff, and I finally got to some meditation. So
there you go.
We're getting there. Every time I tell my story, it's embarrassing. I got to say, I didn't start getting on my knees till I was 6 years sober, and I didn't read the big book till I was 19 years sober, and I didn't really do all the steps till I was 21 years sober, and I didn't start meditating till I was 27 years sober. Yeah. So I'm not recommending you do that, but I'm just telling you that's how it worked for me.
That's the truth. That's the truth, and that's what we have to live with is our own truths. And that's okay. That's okay. Well, listen, Bill, I really can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this interview. It was a pleasure getting to know you, and I will definitely look you up if I'm up that way in Connecticut. Again, I recommend highly the book. Put it in the show notes. Writing the Big Book: The Creation of Alcoholics Anonymous. So,
if you could also mention the Bill Schaberg YouTube channel, there's about 18 talks up there at the moment on exactly what stuff is in the book.
Oh, okay, good. I will make sure we put that in the show notes. There'll be a link to that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Great to meet you. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If we shattered some of your treasured beliefs, well, what are you going to do?
Good job. Good job.
Good job. Thanks so much. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and keep coming back.